She kicked down my door during a secret meeting with the Attorney General. You won't believe what happened next. Imagine my shock, the absolute audacity, when a furious HOA president, Brenda Caldwell, literally kicked down the door of my cherished lake cabin. Can you believe it? My heart pounded as wood splintered and her expensive heels clicked over shattered glass, all while I was simply sharing a quiet beer with none other than Attorney General Victoria Hayes. Brenda, in her designer blazer reeking of an overpowering costly perfume, stormed in, shrieking about supposed violations and demanding jurisdiction, completely unaware she was live-streaming her own arrest to thousands of unsuspecting followers. She was committing multiple felonies right in front of the very person who could lock her away. Just 6 months prior, I'd dismissed Brenda as just another power-hungry neighbor. Little did I know she was orchestrating a massive $4 million embezzlement scheme, and I was about to inadvertently dismantle her entire criminal enterprise. What would you even do if some neighborhood tyrant invaded your private sanctuary during the most crucial meeting of your life? Tell me your thoughts below. Let me rewind and explain how this whole nightmare began. Life was idyllic 6 months ago. I'm Mark Peterson, 52, and after 3 decades of hard work, crawling through muddy trenches to install power grids across counties, I'd finally earned my peaceful retirement. The jewel in my crown? My grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake, 2 acres of pure bliss that my pop acquired for a mere $800 way back in 19. Can you fathom that? Lakefront property now worth more than most homes. It wasn't a sprawling mansion, oh no. It was rustic, built with hand-hewn logs, a stone fireplace Pop crafted with his own calloused hands, and a screened porch that creaked with comforting memories. I'd intentionally kept it off-grid. Solar panels hummed softly, well water tasted like pure childhood, and the septic system was surprisingly robust. The morning mist rising from the lake always reminded me why Pop chose this spot. He always said, "The land chooses you, Mark, not the other way around." He was so wise. Pop also warned me, "Mark, if someone desperately wants your land, dig deep to find out why. It's usually far more valuable than they let on." And then she arrived. Brenda Caldwell, or as everyone soon called her, that HOA psycho, descended upon our tranquil community like a designer-clad tornado. 58 years old, fresh from some California subdivision where apparently being a neighborhood dictator was a full-time profession. She drove a pristine pearl-white Escalade with personalized plates that boldly declared Rule 1. I kid you not. And she wore her HOA president badge like it was a sheriff's star, her sole ambition to transform our rustic haven into what she dubbed an upscale resort community. But what I failed to grasp then was the extent of her sinister plan. 3 elderly couples had already mysteriously sold their cabins within 2 months of her arrival. A funny coincidence, right? Her first act of aggression came on a Tuesday morning. I was on Pop's porch, sipping coffee, watching loons teach their chicks to dive, when I heard that sharp, unmistakable clicking on my wooden dock, designer heels. At 7 a.m., on my private land, 10 minutes later she was taping an official-looking notice to my screen door. Violation citation, unsightly dock structure damaging community property values. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 72 hours or daily penalties will accrue. I had to read it twice. My weathered dock, the one Pop and I had reinforced when I was just 12, was now an eyesore threatening the entire neighborhood's real estate market. As a reasonable man, I approached her to explain that my property actually predated the HOA by roughly 40 years. Do you know what she dared to say? Standing there in my own driveway, hands on her hips, as if she owned the place. Everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetie. Ask the Andersons how well fighting me worked out for them. The Andersons, my elderly neighbors, who had mysteriously downsized just last month, after living here for 23 years. The pieces weren't quite fitting, but a cold dread settled in my stomach. Then came her photo shoot. She circled my cabin like a real estate appraiser, snapping pictures of my solar panels, my vegetable garden, even Pop's hand-carved porch railings. The nauseating scent of her chemical air freshener wafting from her idling Escalade made me want to gag. By the end of that week, I had 3 more citations, each with escalating fines, making it chillingly clear Brenda Caldwell had declared war on everything my family had built on this land. I foolishly believed I was just dealing with a typical power-tripping neighbor. Annoying, yes, but manageable. Oh, how wrong I was. I just painted a huge target on my back in a game far larger and more dangerous than petty HOA squabbles. Pop's words echoed in my mind. Find out why they want your land. I was about to discover the truth, and it would change everything. Brenda wasted no time escalating. 3 days after my compliance deadline passed, because there was no way I was tearing down Pop's dock for some wannabe dictator, a certified letter arrived that turned my morning coffee to ash. Cease and desist. Violation of community waterway regulation. The letter had proclaimed, Blackstone, Meyer and Associates, one of those elite law firms whose partners probably charged more per hour than I earned in a month. The legal jargon essentially claimed my dock illegally extended into the community waterway, demanding $3,000 in retroactive fees, and threatening a lien on my property if I didn't pay up within 10 days. My initial reaction was sheer panic. They had high-powered lawyers. I had a toolbox and a bad attitude. But then, I remembered Pop's constant refrain during our long fishing afternoons. Mark, when someone tries to legally strong-arm you out of your land, the real truth is always in the county records. Never trust what they tell you. Go find the actual paper. So, I drove to the county courthouse, that musty basement, where vital documents are buried under decades of bureaucratic dust. The clerk, a kind woman named Carol, who remembered Pop from his fishing tournament days, helped me retrieve the original property survey. It was a trick I'd learned from my union days. Always check the source documents before some suit tries to pull a fast one with fancy letterhead. What I discovered made my blood boil. My grandfather's lot didn't just extend to the water's edge. It included 50 feet into the lake. The deed, officially stamped from 1963, was crystal clear. That dock wasn't trespassing on community property. It was sitting squarely in the middle of my lake. But here's the real kicker. The HOA wasn't even established until 1998, 35 years after Pop bought his land. I recalled my old foreman saying that older properties often have grandfathered exemptions that trump any newer neighborhood association nonsense. Armed with copies of everything, I marched back to my cabin, feeling incredibly proud. That satisfaction lasted exactly until I tried to leave for groceries and found Brenda's Escalade parked horizontally across my driveway, not beside it, not near it, but directly blocking my exit like a one-woman roadblock. When I tapped on her window, she rolled it down just enough to smugly announce, "Oh, Mark, I'm just reviewing the community parking regulations. This might take a while." The low hum of her idling engine, mixed with that sickeningly sweet air freshener, created a surreal bubble of passive-aggressive insanity. Here I was, a man who'd helped build half the county's electrical infrastructure, held hostage in my own driveway by a suburban soccer mom with a power complex. But Brenda was just warming up. Within a week, she'd formed the Lakeside Beautification Committee, which sounds lovely until you realize it was essentially a hit squad targeting anyone who didn't conform to her country club vision. Suddenly, neighbors who'd waved at me for years were now crossing the street to avoid eye contact. Her Facebook posts were masterpieces of passive-aggressive warfare, filled with concerns about eyesore properties, affecting all our home values, and hashtags like Lakeside Strong and Bought Property Values. The comment sections became a feeding frenzy. People I'd known for decades were suddenly self-proclaimed property law experts, parroting Brenda's talking points like she was some kind of real estate guru. 3 neighbors actually apologized to me privately. Tom and Susan Davis pulled me aside during my evening walk, confessing that Brenda had strongly suggested they complain about my property or face their own citation blitz. Apparently, she'd already targeted old Miss Peterson for non-regulation window boxes and threatened a young couple with a baby over their unsightly playground equipment. "She's got something on everyone," Tom whispered, glancing around as if Brenda might be lurking in the bushes with a camera. "Her husband works up at the state capitol. He's connected, you know, political stuff." That hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't just petty neighborhood drama anymore. This woman had influence far beyond our little lake community. That night I found my mailbox defaced with bright orange spray paint, aggressively spelling out "comply or leave." My solar-powered security camera, discreetly hidden behind a pine tree, captured everything, including Brenda's license plate as she drove away at 2. When I called the sheriff's office the next morning, who showed up? Officer Chad Caldwell, Brenda's nephew. He glanced at the vandalism report, shrugged and dismissed it. Probably just kids. You know how they are. The rough texture of that spray paint under my fingers as I tried to scrub it off felt like sandpaper against my soul. Pop used to say, sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight. It was time to find those bigger guns. Brenda's next move was cloaked as civic duty, making it even more infuriating. Realizing direct confrontation wasn't working, she decided to weaponize the entire county bureaucracy against me. It began with a polite knock on my door from Building Inspector Dan Miller, a guy I'd actually worked with before. The awkward expression on his face told me everything before he even spoke. Mark, I'm truly sorry about this, but I received a complaint about unpermitted structures on your property. You know I have to follow up. 3 hours later, Dan had meticulously crawled through every inch of my cabin with his clipboard and tape measure. His conclusion: everything was not only up to code, but exceeded current safety standards. Pop might have been old school, but he built things to last. Whoever filed this complaint, Dan muttered as he packed up his gear, either has no idea what they're talking about, or they're just trying to waste everyone's time. The next day, Environmental Officer John Brooks arrived investigating reports of my septic system contaminating the lake. Again, perfectly functional, better than most new installations, she admitted. Then Fire Marshal Ben Riley showed up to examine my solar panels for hazardous electrical violations. A clean bill of health there too. Each inspection stole a day of my peace and a chunk of my retirement sanity. More importantly, each false report created an official paper trail, making me appear to be some kind of problem property owner. I remembered my union rep's warning. Bureaucratic harassment was a classic tactic, because it looked legitimate on paper, even when it was pure malice. While I endured this inspection parade, Brenda was busy playing her media game. She'd managed to get herself interviewed by Channel 7's Community Spotlight segment, portraying herself as a concerned citizen bravely fighting to protect our family-friendly lake environment. The news story was a masterclass in selective editing. She showcased carefully angled photos that made my cabin look like some ramshackle backwoods shack, spun tales about dangerous conditions threatening children's safety, and painted herself as a fearless advocate standing against irresponsible property owners. What truly ignited my fury was watching her stand on my dock, the very one she claimed was illegally trespassing, while delivering her concerned citizen performance for the cameras. The relentless buzzing of angry texts from neighbors who'd seen the story felt like machine gun fire. Half the lake community now believed I was some kind of environmental menace. But this is where Brenda made her first real blunder. She got greedy. My old friend Leo Gomez from the Electricians Union called me after seeing the news. Mark, that woman is full of it, and everyone knows. You built half the clean energy infrastructure in this county. Your solar setup is what I use as an example when I'm training apprentices. Within 2 days, Leo had organized a parade of my former co-workers to drive by and inspect my property. Turns out, having 20 master electricians publicly vouch for your work quickly shuts down any hazardous installation narrative. That's when things truly got interesting. My lawyer buddy Chris Adams, we'd gone to high school together, stopped by for a beer and mentioned something that made my ears perk up. You know, Mark, the Attorney General's office has been investigating HOA corruption cases across the state. Several communities are reporting harassment patterns similar to yours. What kind of patterns? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. Elderly homeowners hit with frivolous citations, property values artificially driven down, mysterious buyers swooping in with cash offers. Did that ring any bells? Every single one. Chris explained these schemes typically involved politically connected individuals providing cover, while a harassment campaign forced out longtime residents. The properties would then be flipped to developers for massive profit. The AG's office is looking for witnesses, Chris continued, people who've documented the harassment and can prove the pattern. Someone like you might be exactly what they need. The hum of my refrigerator suddenly seemed unnaturally loud as that information sank in. Brenda wasn't just some power-hungry neighbor. She was potentially part of something far larger and more systematic. That night, I began a meticulous log of every interaction, every citation, every mysterious inspection. I also started digging deeper into Brenda's background. It turned out her husband, Richard Caldwell wasn't just some minor state employee. He was the Democratic Party treasurer, a position that gave him access to development plans, zoning changes, and political favors across multiple counties. The comforting scent of fresh coffee mixing with the morning lake air usually calmed me, but now it only reminded me how much I stood to lose. This wasn't about HOA fees anymore. This was about whether I'd be the next victim in someone else's get-rich-quick scheme. Brenda's next phase made everything before seem like a friendly disagreement. Apparently, bureaucratic harassment wasn't fast enough, so she resorted to full-scale character assassination. It began with a Facebook post that made my stomach drop. Urgent safety concerns about aggressive behavior from lakefront resident. Please keep your children away from the Eastern Shore area. We'll be filing for protective measures. Lakeside safety. Protect our kids. Aggressive behavior. The guy who'd organized the annual kids fishing derby for 15 years straight. Within hours that post was shared dozens of times. The comments section devolved into a digital lynch mob of people who'd never even met me, all convinced I was some dangerous lunatic based on Brenda's carefully crafted victim narrative. I always thought something was off about that man. Heard he threatened an HOA board member. Thank God we have brave people like Brenda looking out for us. The truly sickening part, half these comments came from generic stock photo profiles, the kind of fake accounts political operatives use to amplify their messaging. Brenda wasn't just spreading lies, she was orchestrating a professional smear campaign. 2 days later, she filed a restraining order. The public petition painted me as an unstable individual, making verbal threats against community leaders. A complete fabrication, but it didn't matter. The filing itself became proof that I was dangerous. Judge Elena Ramirez, who actually knew my family from way back, took one look at Brenda's evidence and dismissed the request for lack of credible documentation, but the damage was done. Now an official court document bore my name alongside the word threats. The emotional toll was starting to wear me down. I'd sit on Pop's porch in the evenings, nursing a beer, questioning if this fight was worth shattering the peaceful retirement I'd worked 30 years to. The familiar weight of his leather recliner felt different now, less comfort, more the heavy responsibility of preserving a legacy someone was systematically trying to erase. But just as I considered throwing in the towel, something truly beautiful happened. The community started fighting back. Judge Elena Ramirez wasn't the only one who remembered my family. Retired Judge William Bill Davies, who used to fish with Pop in the 70s, showed up at my door with a thermos of coffee and some unsolicited legal advice. Mark, that woman is playing a game your grandfather would have seen right through. She's counting on you feeling isolated and overwhelmed. Don't give her that satisfaction. Bill explained that documented harassment campaigns like this almost always indicated larger criminal activity. The technical strategy session felt like planning a military operation. We had financial evidence, witness testimony, recorded harassment, and documented fraud. But Agent Rodriguez wanted something bigger. She wanted to catch Brenda in the act of actively committing crimes. The best way to build an airtight case, she explained, is to create a situation where the suspect's criminal behavior is captured by law enforcement in real time. We need her to incriminate herself on camera. That's when Chris suggested the perfect setup. The Attorney General has been looking for an opportunity to announce new HOA reform legislation. What if she held that announcement at Mark's cabin? It's symbolically perfect, protecting homeowner rights in the exact location where those rights were violated. Sarah Evans's eyes lit up. And if Brenda's pattern holds, she'll absolutely try to disrupt any suspicious activity at Mark's property. Her need to control the situation will override her common sense. We spent the next week preparing for what Agent Rodriguez called a controlled confrontation scenario. Professional recording equipment was hidden throughout my cabin. Undercover officers were positioned around the lake. Multiple law enforcement agencies coordinated for rapid response. The community coalition had grown too. Local media was alerted to potential breaking news. Social media campaigns were ready to counter any false narratives Brenda might try to spin. Support networks were activated for the post-confrontation period. My old union training kicked in. When planning a complex job, you prepare for every possible scenario and always have backup systems. We had backup plans for the backup plans. The trap was meticulously set. Brenda's behavior pattern was so predictable that we could practically script her next move. All we had to do was wait for her to kick down the door. Literally, Brenda must have sensed the walls closing in, because her behavior shifted from calculated harassment to full-blown sabotage. It was like watching a cornered animal lash out wildly, growing more dangerous as her options vanished. The first sign, my solar panels mysteriously malfunctioning on a Tuesday morning. I'd wake up to dead batteries and flashing error codes. When Leo, my electrician buddy, came to investigate, he found clear evidence of tampering. Wire connections loosened just enough to disrupt the system without causing obvious damage. "Mark, this is professional-level sabotage," Leo said, photographing the evidence with his phone. "Whoever did this knows electrical system. They wanted to cause problems without leaving obvious fingerprints." But Leo was smarter than Brenda gave him credit for. He'd installed a hidden security camera near the electrical panel after the first incident. 2 nights later, we caught her red-handed creeping around my property at 3:00 a.m. with a screwdriver and wire cutters. The footage was crystal clear. Brenda Caldwell, HOA president and upstanding community member, vandalizing private property under cover of darkness. The acrid smell of her cigarette smoke lingered in the morning air, mixing with the peaceful pine scent. Next came my boat dock. I'd gone into town for groceries and returned to find my boat drifting halfway across the lake. The heavy-duty chains I'd used to secure it were cut with bolt cutters, clean, deliberate cuts that left metal shavings scattered across the dock planks. That boat had been Pop's pride and joy, a 1978 bass boat that still ran like a dream. Finding it bumping against the opposite shore, its hull scratched from the rocks, felt like someone had desecrated his grave. But Brenda's biggest mistake was targeting my septic system. I just passed a county inspection with flying colors, but suddenly my perfectly functioning system started backing up. The smell was horrific. That combination of sewage and chemical additives made your eyes water from 50 feet away. When the emergency septic service arrived, they found industrial-grade drain cleaner had been poured down my system, obliterating all beneficial bacteria and creating a toxic mess. "This is deliberate sabotage," the technician explained, holding up soil samples that showed chemical contamination. "Someone pumped commercial-grade acids into your system. This stuff costs serious money and requires specialized knowledge to use." The repair bill was, more importantly, the chemical analysis provided forensic evidence that this wasn't random vandalism. It was calculated destruction requiring insider knowledge of septic systems. While I was dealing with sewage backup, Brenda was orchestrating her media blitz. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with posts about my ongoing property violations and deteriorating conditions threatening neighborhood safety. The bots were so obvious it was almost comical. Dozens of profiles with generic names posting identical complaints within minutes of each other. She'd also ratcheted up the intimidation network. Officer Chad Caldwell's patrol presence increased dramatically. He'd cruise by my cabin 4 or 5 times a day, always slowing enough to make his surveillance obvious. Sometimes he'd sit in my driveway for 20 minutes, running license plates of anyone who visited. The building inspectors suddenly found code violations in work that had passed inspection just weeks before. The fire marshal received anonymous tips about non-existent fire hazards. Environmental services got reports about illegal dumping in areas of my property they'd already cleared. It was death by 1,000 cuts, designed to exhaust my resources and break my spirit through bureaucratic warfare. But I wasn't the only target anymore. Brenda had started going after my supporters too. Leo's electrical contracting license was suddenly under review for safety violation. Bill Davies, the retired judge advising me, received a formal complaint with the State Bar Association about improper legal counsel to non-clients. The VFW Post faced a surprise fire safety inspection that threatened to shut down their weekly bingo night. The Historical Society was hit with zoning complaints about their downtown office space. Brenda was systematically attacking anyone who'd shown me support, sending a chilling message, "Help Mark Peterson, and you'll become our next target." The psychological pressure was intense. Every morning brought new crises, new emergencies, new bureaucratic nightmares to navigate. The metallic taste of constant stress became as familiar as my morning coffee. But Brenda's desperation was also creating opportunities. Each escalation was being meticulously documented by law enforcement. Every act of sabotage provided additional criminal evidence. Her network of supporters was beginning to distance themselves as her behavior grew increasingly unhinged. The Attorney General's office was watching everything, building an airtight case while Brenda dug her hole deeper with every vengeful act. Agent Rodriguez called it textbook criminal escalation. When perpetrators feel cornered, they often make increasingly reckless decisions that provide prosecutors with the evidence they need for conviction. Brenda was walking straight into our trap, one sabotaged solar panel at a time. Brenda's final play was so audacious it almost worked. She discovered through her husband's political connections that I wasn't just meeting with some random state official. I was meeting with Attorney General Victoria Hayes herself. And instead of backing down, Brenda decided to go nuclear. Her plan was brilliant in its twisted logic. She would portray herself as the victim of a political conspiracy, claiming the state's top prosecutor was targeting her family for partisan reasons. If she could record herself confronting government corruption at my cabin, she could flip the entire narrative and paint herself as a brave whistleblower standing up to abuse of power. The first sign of her new strategy emerged on social media. She'd contacted Government Accountability Watch, one of those blogger networks that amplifies stories about bureaucratic overreach. Her pitch was perfect. Small-town HOA president, being persecuted by big government because her husband worked for the opposing political party. Local family under attack. State officials use harassment investigation to silence political opposition, was the headline that began circulating 3 days before my scheduled meeting. The story painted me as some deep state operative working with corrupt prosecutors to destroy an innocent family. The comments section exploded with outrage from people who'd never heard of our lake community, but were absolutely convinced Brenda was being railroaded by partisan prosecutors. She'd skillfully tapped into that vein of anti-government sentiment prevalent in rural communities, transforming herself into a martyr for political persecution. But Brenda's masterstroke was the live stream setup. She'd arranged to broadcast her confrontation with the Attorney General live on social media, framing it as citizen journalism, exposing government corruption in real time. Her plan was to burst into my cabin during the meeting, record everything, and let her followers disseminate the footage as proof of official misconduct. What she didn't know was that we were monitoring her communication. Agent Rodriguez had obtained warrants for Brenda's phone and social media accounts weeks earlier. We knew about the blogger outreach, the live stream plan, even the talking points she'd prepared for her spontaneous confrontation. "It's actually perfect," Agent Rodriguez explained during our final coordination meeting. "She's going to commit multiple felonies on live video, while providing us with a real-time confession of her motives. We couldn't have scripted it better." The irony was truly delicious. Brenda thought she was setting a trap for us, but she was actually walking into the most thoroughly documented arrest in HOA history. Her support network was crumbling too, but she was too consumed by her obsession to notice. The other HOA board members had quietly distanced themselves once the financial irregularities became glaringly obvious. Her husband was facing his own ethics investigation and could no longer provide political cover. Even Officer Chad had been reassigned to different patrol areas after Internal Affairs started asking pointed questions about his response to my vandalism reports. But Brenda was beyond rational thought at this point. The immense psychological pressure of keeping her fraud scheme hidden while battling multiple investigations had pushed her past the breaking point. She exhibited all the classic signs of someone losing control, paranoid about neighbors spying, making increasingly threatening phone calls to anyone who'd supported me, convinced that everyone was part of some vast conspiracy against her. The night before the Attorney General's visit, she made threatening calls to 4 different families, warning them of dire consequences if they continued collaborating with government harassment. Each call was recorded by law enforcement. Each one provided additional evidence of witness intimidation and criminal conspiracy. I spent that final evening sitting on Pop's porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. The mournful cries of loons calling to each other across the water reminded me why this place was worth fighting for. Tomorrow would decide whether I'd enjoy peaceful evenings like this for the rest of my retirement, or spend my golden years battling Brenda's appeals from federal prison. The cabin felt different that night, not just because of the hidden cameras and recording equipment, but because it had become the epicenter of something far bigger than my personal property dispute. This was about whether small-time criminals with political connections could terrorize entire communities without consequences. I pulled out Pop's worn leather Bible and reread the passage he'd underlined about David facing Goliath. He'd scribbled in the margin, Sometimes the little guy wins because he's fighting for something bigger than himself. The morning would bring Brenda's final desperate gamble. She'd storm through that door, believing she was about to destroy her enemies, never realizing she was about to destroy herself. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. Law enforcement was in position. All we had to do was wait for Brenda to provide the grand finale to her own criminal career. The taste of anticipation, mixed with my morning coffee, had never been so sweet. Attorney General Victoria Hayes was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of some intimidating political figure, she was a down-to-earth woman in her 50s, reminding me of my old high school principal, tough but fair, with eyes that missed nothing. She arrived at my cabin precisely at 9 a.m., carrying a thermos of coffee and a briefcase brimming with evidence that would change everything. "Miss Peterson," she said, settling into Pop's old recliner as if she belonged there, "your meticulous documentation has helped us build cases against HOA corruption rings in 6 counties. What you've uncovered here isn't just local fraud. It's part of a statewide pattern of organized theft." We were deep in discussion about the criminal charges when we heard it. The distinctive roar of Brenda's Escalade screeching into my driveway, gravel spraying everywhere like she was in a high-speed chase. Car doors slammed. Multiple voices shouted instructions about camera angles and audio levels. Brenda had brought her entire social media production crew for what she believed would be her moment of triumph. "Here we go," Agent Rodriguez whispered into her earpiece from her hidden position behind my woodshed. Attorney General Hayes didn't even flinch. She calmly continued taking notes about the financial evidence while Brenda's voice grew louder, working herself into a righteous fury for her live stream audience. "This is it, folks." Brenda's voice carried clearly through my window. "We're about to expose the corruption that's been targeting our family. The state's attorney general is illegally meeting with our harasser, probably planning more government persecution." The sharp click of her designer heels aggressively crossing my wooden porch was like a countdown timer to disaster. Her disaster, not mine. Crash. The door exploded inward as if she'd used a battering ram instead of her foot. Wood splintered everywhere. The Attorney General's coffee mug hit the floor with a ceramic crash that perfectly punctuated the moment. Brenda stormed into my living room, phone held high, live streaming everything, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just committed criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and assault right in front of the state's chief prosecutor. "I demand to know why the Attorney General is secretly meeting with this man," she shrieked, waving her phone like a weapon. "This is government harassment, political persecution. I have right." The look on her face when Attorney General Hayes calmly stood up and displayed her official identification was absolutely priceless. Brenda's live stream captured the exact moment when her brain processed what had just happened. Total frozen terror. "Mrs. Caldwell," the Attorney General stated in that calm professional tone that probably made hardened criminals wet themselves, "I am Victoria Hayes, Attorney General of this state. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence, and your entire criminal performance is being recorded by both my office and your own social media broadcast." Brenda's phone was still live streaming. Her followers watched in real time as their heroic whistleblower dissolved into a babbling, incoherent mess. The comments section exploded with confusion and disbelief, as people realized they'd been supporting a criminal who just self-destructed on camera. This is my community. I have jurisdiction here," Brenda stammered, still somehow convinced her HOA badge gave her authority over state prosecutors. That's when FBI agent Rodriguez stepped through my still open doorway, flanked by 2 other federal agents. "Miss Caldwell, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation and criminal harassment. And thanks to your live stream, we have your confession broadcast to about 3,000 witnesses." The chilling click of handcuffs echoing through my cabin was like the closing of a dramatic book. Brenda's phone clattered to the floor, still streaming her arrest to an audience that had shrunk from outraged supporters to horrified voyeurs watching a public meltdown. "Brenda," I said, rising from Pop's couch with a satisfied smile, "meet the state's Attorney General. She's been wanting to discuss your bookkeeping method." The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, stood on my porch, watching in stunned silence as the woman who'd terrorized our community for months was read her Miranda rights in my living room. Mrs. Albright, who'd driven down from her daughter's place specifically for this moment, had tears streaming down her face. Sheriff Reynolds arrived just in time for the perp walk. Brenda, stumbling in handcuffs past the very dock she'd tried to demolish, past the solar panels she'd claimed were hazardous, past the cabin she'd called an eyesore. Her pearl-white Escalade with its Rule 1 vanity plates was towed away as evidence in the fraud case. The live stream ended with Brenda's voice echoing across the lake. "This isn't over. My husband will fix this. You don't know who you're dealing with." Actually, Brenda, we knew exactly who we were dealing with. A criminal, and criminals go to prison. Watching Brenda's sentencing 3 months later felt like Christmas morning. Federal Judge Michael Thompson didn't just throw the book at her. He launched the entire law library. 3 years in federal prison, $340,000 in restitution to defrauded homeowners, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the United States. Her husband, Richard, wasn't far behind. The ethics investigation revealed he'd been using his position as Democratic Party treasurer to provide insider information about zoning changes and development plans. He resigned in disgrace and received 18 months for conspiracy and abuse of office. The HOA itself dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee. In its place, we formed the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association, emphasis on volunteer. No mandatory fees, no citation authority, no power-hungry presidents, just neighbors working together to preserve our little slice of paradise. My role in exposing the corruption earned me an unexpected reward: whistleblower compensation from the recovered fraud funds. Turns out when you help the feds recover hundreds of thousands in stolen money, they're quite generous. That check for $45,000 felt like vindication for every sleepless night Brenda had caused me, but the true victory was witnessing justice ripple outward. Attorney General Hayes used our case as the foundation for new state legislation that unbelievably bears my name, the Peterson Act. It requires all HOAs to undergo annual independent financial audits and establishes criminal penalties for harassment-based property manipulation schemes. 3 other counties used our evidence to prosecute similar fraud rings. It turned out Brenda's operation was part of a much larger network of politically connected criminals, systematically robbing homeowners across rural communities. The FBI's final report identified over 24 related cases, spanning 5 states. The families who'd been driven from their homes started returning too. The Andersons bought a beautiful new cabin 2 lots down from mine after their old property's fraudulent value concerns were legally voided. Miss Albright moved back from Florida and threw a block party that lasted until sunrise. Property values didn't just recover, they soared. It turns out when you remove the constant threat of harassment and fraudulent citations, people actually want to live in a peaceful lakefront community. Who would have thought? The transformation extended beyond legal victories. Our little lake became a model for sustainable community living. My off-grid cabin, once Brenda's target for eyesore citations, now hosts monthly tours for people interested in solar power and environmental stewardship. The State Environmental Agency featured us in their Renewable Energy Showcase program. I established the POPs Legacy Scholarship, using part of my whistleblower compensation, $500 grants for kids entering trade school programs. Pop always believed that working with your hands was the foundation of an honest life. It seemed fitting to help the next generation learn those same values. The annual Clearwater Lake Festival has become a regional attraction, raising money for veterans' housing assistance programs. Last year, we raised enough to fund 3 tiny home projects for homeless vets. The sweet scent of barbecue and the joyous sounds of families laughing together replaced the toxic atmosphere Brenda had created. But the best part, the quiet moments. I'm sitting on Pop's porch right now, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and purple. The loons are calling to each other across the water, their voices echoing off the same hills where Pop taught me to fish 60 years ago. My solar panels hum peacefully on the roof, powering a life that's finally my own again. No more certified letters, no more inspection visits, no more designer heels clicking across my dock at dawn, just the gentle lap of waves against weathered wood and the profound knowledge that sometimes, if you're stubborn enough and righteous enough, David really can beat Goliath. The documentary crew from Netflix finished filming here last month. HOA Hell: How One Man Took Down a Criminal Empire premieres next spring. They paid me enough to add a guest cabin where other harassment victims can stay while fighting their own battles. Because Brenda wasn't unique. There are power-drunk HOA dictators in communities across America, terrorizing elderly homeowners and stealing from community funds. But now there's a roadmap for fighting back.
Now I want to hear from you. Share your own HOA nightmare below. Trust me, you are not alone in this fight. These stories need to be told. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about everyday people taking down corrupt systems, because there's a lot more where this came from. Next week, I'm telling you about the city councilman who tried to shut down a veteran's food truck until the owner's Pentagon buddies decided to pay a visit. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their... If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild